Hi, everybody. Welcome to the recap for episode 66 of The Question. My friend Laura Kalbag is here, and we talked about the design system learning curve. It was a really fun conversation. Laura, thank you so much for hopping right back onto a call with me to try to unpack some of the things we learned. We just got off the deep dive. We had a ton of folks there. We had a lot of answers this week and such a good and nuanced conversation around education and learning and systems. Did you? How are you feeling after having gone through that deep dive?
I'm feeling really hopeful, actually. I think that I came at it with so many questions and so many concerns about the learning curve of design systems and how do we help people that are new into systems? How do we mature as a community and learn from each other in a way that's effective? And I've come out of it with so many ideas and thoughts and different threads that we could follow, and I love that. It's been great.
That's so good. I love that. I'm glad you didn't come out fearful. Tell me, I want to know, we didn't really talk about this in the deep dive, but I want to know what's happening in your world right now that sort of led you to this kind of thinking.
Well, I know that something that you and I have in common is that because we're often educating people in the realm of design and adjacent areas, I'm always trying to think of how do the things that I've been learning and working on, how do I bring other people into that? How do I make this accessible to more people? That's why I got into the web in the first place as a form of technology, because I loved that other people were sharing it and letting me into that. And with my work right now with PenPot, a lot of what I'm doing is I'm basically teaching people how to do design and development to some degree. And I want to help people get into the industry. I want to help people learn what it takes to be a professional in the industry in a way that is friendly and not gatekeepery. And I think that this is a huge part of that, is how do we make design systems an environment that people can work in and that they feel comfortable joining.
And having spent some time with you in Madrid at PenPot Fest last year and in October in Bristol at Converge, I know this is such an authentic part of who you are. It's so cool to hear you kind of express it in this way. But, you know, your background in accessibility for the web carries through now into how you want people to learn, like making accessible learning opportunities is kind of what I hear you saying. That's like, it's so good. It's so who you are.
Yeah. And I loved some of the directions that the conversation took today because it came through that I'm not unique in that. That is something that's actually quite common to a lot of the design systems community, is that desire to share and to bring other people in, and not to make it about how do I as an individual make money from this and exploit this opportunity, but how do I bring other people in like me.
Yeah, that was definitely a thread. And honestly, it's something that I see in every episode, right? The way that the question is structured doesn't work if people don't have that attitude. So in a sense, I think it is a part of the DNA of the industry, of the systems space, you know. I wanted to call one thing out right away, which is, you know, we asked 4 questions this week. One of the very first one was, do you feel qualified to be a design system specialist? And I had no idea what kind of answers we'd get to this, because I talked to a lot of folks and in this, you know, in the system space, and I do hear a lot of folks express this, you know, the word we use is like imposter syndrome, right? Like this sort of like feeling like they just are not really qualified for the role that they're in.
Yeah.
I think it's a topic that has been talked about a lot in our space, you know, and it seems to me like it's maybe a little bit more prevalent here in systems. And I wondered if you have a sense for why that might be. Like, is there something that you think is unique about this space? Or
I think when we look through a lot of the responses in terms of how people learned about design systems and felt like they developed the level of expertise that they have, so much of that is people saying that they are self-taught. And I think that it was also prompted by, later on, talking about the idea of standards. People were also seeking reassurance that what they know is the right thing or is a best practice. And so I think that those things do go hand in hand. I think it's one of those things you see is when someone is self-taught, they haven't had a qualification handed down to them by an academic institution or otherwise. And so I think there is a lack of like being sure in yourself in that scenario.
Yeah, that's a really good. I wasn't thinking about that correlation between like almost every answer to the. I think it was the second question, which was, how have you learned the skills needed to work as a design system practitioner? Almost every answer talked about, it's like grit. It's like, I'm scrappy. I just go figure things out. I ask questions. I talk to people. I experiment. It's not like you can go get a degree, in this.
Yeah.
And so it does require individuals who, who are maybe more system-minded. What was the quote? Somebody brought a quote.
Oh, I've got that written down.
Oh my gosh,
it was
so good.
Greg who brought this quote to us, and it was something that Greg said that he'd read elsewhere. As with many of the folks, everyone is always referring to the people that they have learned from and not taking credit for themselves.
Yeah.
The people who see systems are the ones who make them.
That's so good. And it's like a theme in almost all of our episodes, because I always ask my co-hosts how they got into systems. And inevitably, people who are like in the system space, they see systems everywhere, and that quote just embodies that sort of reality for us so well. And I think in the conversation earlier, we talked about this idea that there's benefits to that, right? Like it makes you a good design system practitioner, but it also has, another side. We've done episodes in the past with Lauren LaPrette where we talked about just managing your system's brain, like how do you turn that off in your personal life when everything that you look at and see is a system and you see the implications of decisions that people are making and things like this. So I think it's
you brought that up during the discussion, and you mentioned the risk of burnout in that scenario. But I also pointed out the potential that we over-codify things as systems thinkers, and we can, in a way that can feel quite overstructured and like counter to innovation to the people who are consuming the design systems. They can find that it's too restrictive. Often if we do tend to over-codify things in that way. I do think along that line what Ismail and Yesenia, actually, both of them were pointing out that the systems thinking is why a lot of people need to work in other roles first as well. That often, if you come from a product design or development background, or I think even Ismail mentioned product management is very valuable in terms of systems thinking. And Yesenia too saying that design systems in itself has become such a broad field that it's not one role, and that specializing in a role could be very valuable to people. And Yesenia really knows what she's talking about. She's had an expertise in design systems for such a long time and worked with a lot of people in that. And so I would definitely take that recommendation.
100%. She's co-hosting our next episode too, so I'm really excited to have her join. And she talked about, one of the things that she talked about was like, it's one thing to know how to design things, the product. It's one thing to know how to take that design in the product space and systematize it so it can be used by multiple products. And it's a whole nother thing to figure out, how do you change an organization's perspective on making interface, like the organizational change side of this work is so huge. And I think that for me, like this is where I've put so much of my energy over the last few years, is like, I feel like there's a lot of material on like how to make a component in Figma or in PenPot or whatever tool. There's a lot of material on how to make a component in React or pick your framework. There's not so much material on how to change the perspective of your VP of product, in a way that creates incentives for people to use systems. And that's like a different level of thinking that is not part of the normal designer developer learning,
Yeah. Well, I think if you don't mind me taking us on
Please.
to one of the later questions that we have, because I think it's relevant here, was when we were talking about, do you believe that we need a set of industry-wide design system standards? So the example that you gave was what the W3C provide in terms of web standards for, say, accessibility in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or there's some privacy ones, and there's also protocols. There's design tokens standard that's been emerging that's in like quite a relevant field right now. But one of the, talking on the people side of things and the process side of things, one of the things that really came out of this conversation for me was the idea that we don't necessarily need so much standards around those components and around those things, but it is helping people with the processes around creating a system. The idea that we want it's frameworks of principles rather than prescription. And I think that that's a fascinating thing that we could learn from other people, is the how to do the people side.
Yeah. And those are problems that like other industries have had to solve too, right? Like we're not the first people to realize that it's hard to change an organization, certainly. So that's where I'm always looking to like other spaces, and I think a lot of systems thinkers do this, right? We see, like we said, we see systems everywhere. So why not look at architecture? Why not look at, whatever, even just like the way sort of scientific papers are evaluated. There's like such rigor in that space. And I feel like we're missing some of that in our space too, things like that I'm always curious about. But what for you, like how have you learned, or have you, had the opportunity to kind of experiment with and learn some of the org change stuff, some of the culture stuff? Like where is that in your career? Where has that shown its head?
Yeah, well, for me, part of the issue is that when I was working with doing client work, I was always being brought in for very short periods of time, which is, it's impossible to create change in that time, really. And that's one of the things that got me into design systems, was this idea of, okay, how can I leave a system behind that other people can build upon and work with, rather than temporary work? And so the people side of it is so much harder. And when after Converge, one of the things that I took back to the Penpot team was, and I mentioned this in the discussion, was not the tools. You can only provide so much as someone that's building a design platform or a design tool for design systems folks, because really the gnarliest problems that people are trying to solve are around people. And actually, that was one of the things that Yesenia mentioned that I thought was really interesting, was there's already component galleries out there, but why not have a gallery of solutions to user problems and different ways that those have been solved? Flipping it round in terms of, it's not about tools, it's not about components. It's, again, whether it's on the consuming design systems or as a person who is using something that is built using a design system, how do we solve those problems?
Yeah, that was such an interesting part of the conversation. I think we were talking about standards at that time, and you're right. Yesenia mentioned that idea of a gallery of the user problems. Stephen came back to that and was like, I want to see examples of how teams are articulating problems and values across different organizations. And I thought that, oh my goodness, yeah. Like it takes us as a consultant, as a coach, it takes a lot of time. It can take us 3 to 6 months to clearly articulate the values and principles that a design system is sort of positing to the rest of the organization that we all follow. It's a long process. It takes a lot of collaborative work, sessions where we're pulling out of people the things they care about and trying to identify how do we focus those in and find the ones where there's commonality across the org, so that it's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah.
And a way that we could sort of show, here's how teams have done that. Here's the process they've used. Here's the output they're generating that's actually worked. So many good ideas there.
Was it also Stephen that said about the idea that if you are sharing your values effectively as part of your design system, then in his experience, the things can follow from that more easily, like the rest of the design system flows. And that became quite an interesting discussion generally, I think, about values in your systems, because one of the questions when we were talking about standards was who defines the standards.
Yeah.
Like for me, as someone who has a not-for-profit around trying to build things that are not big tech, that are small tech, that don't have those same values as big tech organizations, how much of those values do we embed in design systems, and do we want to be copying design system principles from the organizations that don't necessarily share our values?
Yeah.
And I thought it was that fascinating example of was it accessibility standards and getting certified and paying someone to get a certification in that. And should standards be something that are in a top-down structure handed down to us, or should it be, I guess, a culture that we've got from, to some degree, open source or free and open culture, of how do we build things together as a community rather than being an individual or organization handing them down to people?
Right. Yeah. Like the idea that I can exchange money for, some sort of credibility in a craft is it's foreign to me, other than I guess that's higher education to a certain extent, right?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
That is, but to be honest, that was also one of the flaws of academia for me. I went to art school, I studied design. I came out of that feeling so confident and cocky about my ability in design, only to very quickly learn over time how little I knew and how little I was prepared for the professional world. And that's one of the things that I try to do now, is create materials that I feel like help people work as professionals, and what's current, what's practical information, not just academic or theoretical information.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's so good. We used to run my company Sparkbox. We do a lot of, product design development, system design and development for larger organizations. And for a long time, for maybe 10 years, we ran an apprenticeship program. It was a paid position, and we would pay you for 6 months, basically just to learn. Because what we found is that everybody we hired right out of school, it was what you said, they kind of were very excited to be working, but they really did not have the skills to operate in the environment in which we needed them to. And so we developed our own curriculum, and everybody on our team took time to kind of mentor these folks. And at the end of 6 months, we would sort of make some offers, bring folks on. And in fact, we still have people now. There's one of our technical directors right now at Sparkbox who started as an apprentice and just has worked her way up the ladder of her career ladder, by just growing and showing such promise. And so I think that for us, that's been a big part of our DNA, but I don't think that's common in the space, and, especially in the world we're in now, where it's like, we can get into a whole nother thread on like AI and how it's sort of usurping entry level positions and, what that's going to do for us long term. I don't know that we need to go there right now in this conversation, but there's a lot to unpack.
Well, and it's also impacting learning generally, because I think we discussed how do we create learning paths for people in order to go from someone who maybe hasn't worked inside of design systems to feeling maybe like they have some level of competency. I mean, we already discussed how most people don't. But I think that AI is impacting that, because it's difficult to find information that is good.
Yeah.
that is giving you good advice, that is not just something that is generated poorly in order to create sort of search engine optimized content that it's machines talking to machines
It
and
really
there's no
is.
human information in there.
Yeah.
And I do think that is something that we could really share as a community and start to pool resources. It's one of the values of the human connection in this, and what you're building in terms of a community is that helps cut through irrelevant information to the good stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's so good. I mean, to put a finer point on that concept, I think one of the things we saw in the answers around, standardization was, instead of pushing for some sort of top-down standard like we've talked about, could we have one that is more like acknowledging there's a lot of really good content out there, but it's spread out, it's hard to find, it's hard to validate, like you just said. So as a community, could we gather the right resources for specific folks at specific points of their career to help them figure out how to kind of come into the space with confidence? And, I don't know what that looks like. There's a lot of work to do there, but I think there's a lot of value in something like that,
Yeah, I feel like this could be a starting point for that. Like,
I think so.
This is where we begin.
I know, right? I love that. Gosh, anything else that sort of stuck out to you from the conversation?
Oh, I'm looking through my notes as well. I've got so many like brilliant things. Like even, yes, there are so many component galleries out there. What if the standards are building upon the existing HTML elements?
Yeah.
The patterns of, we're reinventing the wheel of this HTML element plus another HTML element equals a pattern. And why don't we have I think that's something that a lot of people mentioned was Brad Frost's idea of the global design system could be a part of that idea of standardization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I think was a nice comment. Taylor mentioned this idea that he sort of sees as an industry that we're kind of in a unique space right now where, design systems as a practice is pretty new, although we've been thinking about, system thinking forever, right? But as a practice, maybe a decade, folks have had formal positions in the space. And we're at a point now where those folks who started, early days as design system practitioners are now leading teams. They're now, VPs. They're now in leadership in organizations and understand, they come with context from being an IC in the space. And that maybe in his mind, he was sort of suggesting that puts us kind of on the edge of something new, right? Where maybe, there's a little bit more fertile soil inside of a lot of these organizations when they elevate folks from the practice into leadership. So I'm excited about that. And I hadn't thought about it quite like that. And I think your response was such a authentic response from you, which is like, okay, so how do we get the pipeline, to help folks come into those roles,
Yeah. So I'm always thinking that of, okay, that it's great that exists. And so how can we get the benefit of that leadership, that expertise, that time spent? Is there a way of making that more accessible to everybody else?
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful, Laura, for your time, for your wisdom, and for sharing your expertise today and just helping facilitate such a meaningful conversation. There is so much good material in that FigJam file. If you have not had an opportunity to go take a look at that or dig into it, please do so. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the community as well for your insight. It's been incredible. Such fun.
Yes. And we'll see you soon, Laura. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.